On the morning of August 10th, 1987, Janice Christensen, a 31-year-old woman, set out for her routine jog along the Summit County Metro Bike Path in Hudson Township, Ohio. Known for her disciplined and active lifestyle, Janice was following her usual route, a peaceful wooded trail that wound through the scenic countryside. Her day began like any other, filled with the mundane normalcy of suburban life, but it would soon descend into tragedy. Janice had planned to be back home after her jog, but when she didn't return at the expected time, her husband, Ken Christensen, began to worry. The initial hours of concern quickly turned into alarm as time passed with no word from Janice. Her failure to return home was completely out of character, prompting Ken to contact the local police. A search was swiftly organized, with both law enforcement and Janice's family combing through the areas surrounding the bike path. In the early hours of August 11th, 1987, just a day after Janice had gone missing, the search ended in the worst possible way. Her body was discovered by her husband, Ken, in a secluded area off the bike path. She was partially clothed, indicating a possible sexual assault, and had suffered 5 stab wounds. The discovery of a pair of shoelaces lying beside her body added to the grim scene. Shoelaces that investigators later determined did not belong to Janice, hinting at the possibility that they were used as a restraint during the attack. Janice's car was also missing from the scene, raising further suspicions about the nature of the crime likely to be premeditated and involving sexual assault. The vehicle, along with her car keys, was discovered 6 days later, abandoned in the nearby town of Bedford, and it offered no new clues, as it appeared the perpetrator had taken great care to avoid leaving behind any identifying evidence. Despite the thorough search and the best efforts of law enforcement, the identity of Janice's killer remained a mystery. The initial investigation was thorough, but ultimately fruitless. Law enforcement officials scoured the area for evidence and interviewed potential witnesses, but no one had seen Janice after she set out on her jog that morning. The secluded nature of the bike path meant that the crime had likely occurred in isolation, with no one nearby to intervene or even notice what had happened. Investigators worked tirelessly, considering every possible angle. They examined the possibility of a random attack by a stranger, as well as the potential that the perpetrator could be someone Janice knew. However, despite extensive efforts, the investigation eventually stalled. Also, the DNA technology in 1987 was still in its infancy, limiting the ability of forensic scientists to extract a full profile from the evidence collected at the scene. Nonetheless, the case was not entirely forgotten. As DNA technology advanced over the years, investigators retained hope that the evidence collected at the scene could one day yield answers. Samples from the crime scene were preserved, and as forensic techniques improved, there were renewed efforts to solve the case. Yet it wasn't until decades later that a breakthrough would finally occur. In 2022, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation's Cold Case Unit, which had been established in 2020, decided to revisit the Christensen case. Detectives and forensic experts re-examined the evidence, including the DNA samples from the original crime scene. These samples were submitted for retesting using state-of-the-art DNA analysis techniques, far more advanced than what had been available in 1987. This retesting was not limited to the Christensen case alone. Investigators also looked into similar unsolved cases from the same period, hoping to identify any connections or patterns that might lead to a suspect. One such case involved the May 1987 sexual assault of a teenager, Michelle Pruitt Howard, in Cuyahoga Falls. The similarities between the two cases were striking. Both victims were attacked on a trail, bound by shoelaces, and had their vehicles stolen. When the DNA evidence from the Cuyahoga Falls case was retested and entered into the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, it produced a match. The DNA profile matched that of a man named Thomas Jordan. Immediately following, the investigators faced a new challenge. By the time this connection was made, Jordan had already been dead for over a decade, having passed away in 2009 in Yuma, Arizona. To conclusively link him to these crimes and ensure that no mistakes were made, authorities took the extraordinary step of exhuming his body in April 2024. This exhumation was not merely a formality, it was a crucial step in validating the DNA evidence, confirming beyond a shadow of a doubt that Jordan was responsible for the heinous acts committed in 1987. The exhumation and subsequent testing of Jordan's remains confirmed what investigators had suspected. Thomas Jordan was indeed the man responsible for the brutal slaying of Janice Christensen and the sexual assault of Michelle Puett Howard. This conclusion was not reached lightly, but was the result of years of painstaking work by cold case detectives, who meticulously pieced together the evidence that had long eluded them. Jordan's criminal history painted a disturbing picture of a violent man who had been in and out of the criminal justice system for much of his life. Born in Cleveland in 1926, Jordan had a long track record of serious offenses, beginning with grand larceny and burglary, and escalating to assault and stabbing. His crimes were not confined to Ohio. He had been connected to violent acts in several other states, including Arizona, Nevada, California, Louisiana, and Michigan. Despite his extensive criminal record, Jordan had managed to evade justice for his most heinous crimes for decades, underscoring the challenges that law enforcement faces in tracking and apprehending serial offenders. Although Jordan died in 2009, never facing trial or conviction for his crimes against Janice Christensen, the discovery of his culpability provided a measure of closure for her family, who had spent years grappling with the uncertainty and pain of not knowing who was responsible for her death. For Michelle Puett Howard, the revelation also brought a long-awaited resolution, even if the man who had attacked her would never be held accountable in a court of law. On October 13, 1987, in Riverside, California, a man was rummaging through a dumpster, searching for recyclable materials. This seemingly mundane activity led to a horrifying discovery that would haunt the community and investigators for decades. As the man sifted through the trash, he came across something unimaginable: a small, lifeless body wrapped in discarded rags. It was a newborn baby girl. The scene was gruesome. The tiny body, which had clearly been abandoned shortly after birth, was found inside a dumpster located behind a business in a relatively quiet part of Riverside. The baby appeared to have been born full term, and the circumstances of her death were immediately deemed suspicious. How could something so innocent be discarded in such a heartless manner? Who could have been responsible for such an act? These were the questions that would haunt not just the man who made the discovery, but the entire Riverside community. And yet, how to solve a crime when the only witness was a victim who could never speak? Local authorities were quickly alerted. The Riverside Police Department arrived at the scene, and the Riverside County Coroner's Office conducted an autopsy. The results were devastating. The baby had died as a result of deliberate actions, and the case was officially ruled a homicide. The coroner noted that the baby was most likely alive at birth, but had been killed soon after. However, the exact cause of death was not released to the public, adding to the mystery and horror surrounding the case. The initial investigation, led by the Riverside Police Department, was thorough but ultimately fruitless. Detectives canvassed the area around the dumpster, interviewed local residents and business owners, and looked into any recent reports of missing infants or suspicious behavior among women in the late stages of pregnancy. Unfortunately, nothing led them closer to identifying the mother of the baby or determining the exact circumstances that led to the child's death. Also, there were no witnesses, no surveillance footage, and no clues left at the scene to indicate who might have committed this heartless act. The only piece of evidence they had was the baby herself, who came to be known as Baby Jane Doe. With no leads and no immediate suspects, the case quickly grew cold. Over the years, new technologies and methods in forensic science emerged, but for many cold cases like this one, these advancements came too late. For Baby Jane Doe, the critical pieces of evidence had long since degraded or been lost to time, and without a suspect, there was little that could be done. The case file, once active and filled with the hopes of a quick resolution, grew dusty and yellowed as it sat in storage. Occasionally, a detective with a passion for solving cold cases would pull it out, review the sparse details, and perhaps even follow up on an old lead. But these efforts always ended the same way, with the file being returned to its place, unsolved and, it seemed, unsolvable. The local community eventually moved on, the memory of the incident fading into the background of more recent events. For the detectives who had worked the case, however, the image of the tiny baby, discarded like trash, remained a haunting reminder of a life lost and justice unserved. It wasn't until 2020, when the Riverside Police Department formed a new homicide cold case unit, that the file was reopened. This unit was created specifically to apply new forensic techniques to old cases, offering a glimmer of hope that Baby Jane Doe might finally get a name and her story might finally be told. The first step for the unit was to reassess the evidence with fresh eyes and the latest technology. This included sending any remaining physical evidence, mainly items found at the scene, such as the rags the baby was wrapped in, to advanced DNA testing labs such as Othram Inc., which were now capable of doing things that would have been unimaginable in 1987. And it was this decision that would eventually break the case wide open. In November 2021, Othram scientists successfully extracted a DNA sample from the evidence and used forensic-grade genome sequencing to create a comprehensive DNA profile. By comparing that profile against public and private databases to find potential familial matches, investigators were able to trace the DNA to possible relatives of the baby. This process, while time-consuming and complex, eventually led them to a breakthrough: the identification of the baby's mother. In early 2024, after painstaking genealogical work and follow-up investigations, the Riverside Police Department identified the mother as Melissa Jean Allen Avila, a 55-year-old woman living in Shelby, North Carolina. Avila had been 19 years old at the time of the baby's death and had managed to evade detection for nearly 4 decades. The identification of Melissa Avila was a significant moment in the case, but it also posed new challenges. The investigators had to carefully build their case to ensure that the evidence, now several decades old, would hold up in court. This required a coordinated effort between multiple law enforcement agencies, including the Riverside Police, the U.S. Marshals, and local authorities in North Carolina. Once sufficient evidence had been gathered, an arrest warrant was issued. On August 5, 2024, Avila was apprehended by the U.S. Marshals Carolinas Regional Fugitive Task Force and extradited to Riverside, where she was formally charged with taking the life of her newborn daughter. Once in California, Avila was booked into the Larry D. Smith Correctional Facility in Riverside County. She is being held on a $1.1 million bond. The high bail amount indicates the serious nature of the crime and the potential flight risk, given that Avila had managed to evade detection for so long. As the legal proceedings began, Avila faced a series of court hearings where she would be formally charged, and the evidence against her would be presented. This case, like many cold cases that are solved years later, presents unique challenges in the courtroom. The passage of time can affect the availability of witnesses, the condition of evidence, and the memories of those involved. Hopefully, as the legal process unfolds, it will not only seek to bring justice for the newborn who was abandoned so many years ago, but also serve as a message about the enduring nature of justice. If you find this video compelling, show your support by giving it a thumbs up, subscribing to our channel, and ringing that notification bell. By doing so, you'll stay updated about the latest investigations and mysteries. Your support means the world to us as we continue to pursue the truth in the world of cold cases.